we are constantly encouraged to want what we don't have. Constantly encouraged to want things we don't have. Whatever realm that is, whether that's physically or emotionally or with items that we have. I think Prime Day is coming up. I've been alerted to. And you never see something that just says, there's never an ad or a commercial that comes on TV and they just say, you know, you probably have enough. The end, right? You always need something else. The next model, the next thing, the next, whatever it is. We're always encouraged to want more. I remember as a kid hearing, I think it was Lay's chips, and it was, you can't just have one. And obviously that's true. No one would open a bag of chips and just go, one, the end, and then put it back. But that idea, or Pringles, once you pop, you just can't stop, is prevalent throughout all things, is you can't just have enough. You need more. Constantly, that is what we are encouraged to want bigger, to want better, to want different, to want something else. It's very difficult for us to be content and to just say, I'm thankful for what I have, I enjoy the blessings that God has given me, and I'm good. That's very difficult for us to do that. We're often stuck in a place of thinking, I will be okay, I will be better, things will be better, my life will be better once, fill in the blank, whatever it is, right? Once I get this, once I get to this next season, once I get this amount of money, once I get this job, once I get married, once I have kids, once I move here, then things will be better. We're constantly encouraged to be in that place, and then we'll have contentment. And yet, no matter what place we get to, no matter what season we arrive at, no matter what status we achieve, no matter what financial situation or emotional situation, we still struggle with being discontent. What if our circumstances, and just think about this for a minute, what if your circumstances, no matter what they were, what if your circumstances didn't control your emotions? What if your circumstances didn't control at all? What if your circumstances didn't have that power over you? Whether it was the darkest day or the lightest day, if your circumstances didn't have power over you, that would give you a great power. That would give you a great power in your life. It would cure much, if not all, of our anxiety and fear and worry over the future, over what's coming, over our financial situation, over our health. It would cure so much anxiety. It would give us a lot more wisdom, because we wouldn't be making choices just worried about things and fearful about things, or just discontent trying to get more. We would have actual clarity and good judgment about decisions that we were trying to make. It would get rid of greed and consumerism and materialism. It would make us more generous people. It would help us to live with greater joy and faithfulness to God, not circumventing the things that He has said. What if your circumstances didn't control you at all? What if you could be content? And the Bible talks a lot about this in different places and different situations. Today, we'll look at a piece that the Bible gives us that can help us in this. This isn't the full story. It's not everything that we need, but it's a part that can be very helpful. And for some of you, maybe right now life is difficult, and you need to experience, okay, God, what can I do to help myself be more content? And for some of you, maybe life is really good, but is it just because your situation and circumstances are good? Are you ready for what might be coming soon? Maybe you've learned the secret of contentment. You've learned to be able to be content, but you need to be able to help, encourage, and strengthen others. That's part of what we do as a church. Is some of us may be experiencing good and contentment, and God helps us to help those that are weaker and burdened. And maybe that's what God wants to give to you today. How do we experience contentment? That's what we're going to look at. There's three things that we need to remember to experience contentment. I'll read this section, and then we'll look at the three things. Here's what Paul says. Let each one live his life in the situation the Lord assigned when God called him. This is what I command in all the churches. Was anyone already circumcised when he was called? He should not undo his circumcision. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? He should not get circumcised. Circumcision does not matter, and uncircumcision does not matter. Keeping God's commands is what matters. Let each of you remain in the situation in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Don't let it concern you. But if you can become free, by all means, take the opportunity. For he who is called by the Lord as a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who is called as a free man is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of people. Brothers and sisters, each person is to remain with God in the situation in which he was called. 3 things we need to remember to be content, to experience contentment, no matter what the circumstances or situation is. First thing is to remember God's control. Remember God's control. If I asked you, if we were to sit down and talk, I said, what would make your life better right now? Think about that for you. What would make your life better right now? Maybe you've already been thinking about it. Maybe you've been praying about it. Maybe it's been keeping you up at night. What would make your life better right now? What would make it more full? Often some change of circumstances, some change of situation is what we think of. We need more of something or less of something or easier of something. Maybe it's more time or more money, or maybe it's a babysitter or a different house or different place to live or different job, different relationships. But what we see here is what he says is what we really need is not a change of our circumstances, but acceptance of the circumstances that we are in. Acceptance of God's placement. Let each one live his life in the situation. Live your life in the situation. And that doesn't just mean go on existing, because of course you're already doing that. It means an acceptance. Let each one live his life in the situation you find yourself. Trusting God's placement. Trusting God's wisdom. Now this can be hard. This can feel really hard. We don't like certain aspects of our life. We don't like certain aspects of what we have or don't have. We wonder sometimes why other people have something that we don't have. Why other people's life went this way and our life went this way. We wonder why we've prayed and asked God to do something different, and there hasn't been the change that we would expect or hope for or want, even if somebody else got it and we didn't get it. So we can struggle with the situation that we find ourselves in, but what he is helping us see is it's not an accident. It is assigned. Think about that language. Let each one live his life in the situation the Lord assigned. You have to remember that what your situation is not an accident. It is assigned. The situation you find yourself in, it's easy for us to blame other people. It's easy for us to say it was this person's fault, or this person did this, or this, or it's because of this, or it's not fair. He said, listen, it's not an accident where you are. It's been assigned by God. Your life is not luck. Your life situation, it's not just happenstance. It's not just, I don't know, fate. It is assigned by God. That makes all the difference, because it means that God, in his great control over all the earth, and in his great love of you, and in his great wisdom, said, I assign this for you. That helps us begin to experience contentment. This isn't an accident. God, the one that loves me with all great love, the one who has all the power, the one who is wiser than anything I could ever fathom, put me here. And not just generically. It doesn't just say he assigned Denver people to this, or Arvada people to this, or millennials to this, or boomers to this. That's not what it says. It says each one. Let each one of you. That means God particularly looked at your life and assigned this to you. Not vindictively, not in his wrath, but in his great love and great wisdom and great power, God assigned this to you. And we may not understand that. We may not like the part that we play. It might not make sense to us. It might not even seem like anything useful or important. I don't know if you've ever been to the symphony or played in the symphony maybe, or a band in high school or something. And especially at a symphony, a professional symphony, each person has their part, and it might be even kind of small. If you stripped away everything else, they just go, doo-doo. That's their part, a couple times, doo-doo. Or boom, boom. They get their one part, and that's it. And you might feel like, by myself, it just feels like I'm going, wow, thanks, God. But God knows what he's doing. God has orchestrated even that word, orchestra, right? God has orchestrated all the pieces of your life and our lives and the lives of his people and assigned you a part to play. It's not an accident. It is very purposeful, even if we can't see the full picture. We have to trust God's control, to remember God's control, his wisdom, his power, his love in his placement of you. What if you believe that? What if you believed in all the various situations that you're experiencing and all the things that have made you you and all the things that have happened and are happening? What if you believed he knows you, he loves you, he's wise, and he's in control? Where you are matters. The life situation that you find yourself in. Paul uses examples of circumcision and uncircumcision and slavery and freedom, but it's really all situations, which is why he says, let each one live his life in the situation the Lord assigned. So it can be broadened from every situation. What if you believed where you are matters? Whatever it is. It's not insignificant. You want to be content? This is one of the starting foundations. You have to remember God is in control. God is in control. He knows what he's doing. And he loves me, and he assigned this for me. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need to remember God's commands. We need to remember God's commands because as we find ourselves in various situations, we can begin to question, how do I live? How do I live? There's a hard situation happening in your life. Maybe it might be even helpful for you just to think about what are the situations you find yourself in that you would want to change. And there's questions that come up. How do I live in this hard situation? How do I live because of the things that have happened in my past, even choices that I've made and things that have happened to me or been done to me? How do I live? What do I do? What's the right course of action? What's the best next thing? Think about that with your job. You feel discontent or you feel unsure about the situation in your job. Maybe you have a messed up family. What do I do? Maybe you've experienced divorce, or maybe you've experienced divorce that has shaped you as far as from your family, your parents. Maybe there's sickness or illness. Maybe there's relationship problems, people in your life, and you don't like the situation that you're in, but what do I do? What do I do? And there's a simple answer. Simple answer is we obey. That's what he says. He says these different situations that you might find yourself in, they don't matter. Here's what matters. Keeping God's commands is what matters. So there's these people that are struggling with, okay, I'm circumcised, I'm uncircumcised, do I do this? Do I undo it? I don't know how you undo circumcision, by the way. That's interesting procedure. I don't know if it involves Play-Doh or what, but but what matters is keeping God's commands. That's what matters. So you might find yourself in all these different situations and you don't like them. You wonder if you should change them or how you should change them. And I love the simplicity that Paul gives. He says, listen, those things don't matter. Here's what matters. There is something that matters. Keeping God's commands is what matters. That's what matters. we can be so focused on changing our situation. We can be so focused on trying to get out of things that here's what happens, we begin to neglect God's commands. We begin to grumble and complain, which is breaking God's commands. We begin to disobey and excuse it because of our situation. Well, you don't understand. If you had a mom like this, if you had a dad like this, if you had a son like this, if you had a daughter like this, if you had an uncle like this, a brother like this, a sister, if you had a boss like this, then you would also. If you had my job, if you had my financial situation, and we begin to disobey God and excuse our disobedience because of our situation. When what Paul is saying is your situation cannot trump God's commands. Your situation is not as important as your sanctification. What matters is that we obey God's commands. And so often we think, because of the difficulty of our situation, whatever it is, and I'm not trying to belittle or minimize very painful situations. There can be very hard situations in our life. There can be minor frustrations, but there can also be very serious, painful situations. And Paul says, that doesn't mean that we throw out God's commands. It doesn't mean we set those aside. It doesn't mean that we begin to say things like, well, God would want me to be happy, so therefore it's okay if I do this. It doesn't mean that we say, well, you don't understand, or God will forgive me later. I've talked to people that are set on a course of disobedience and say, God will forgive me later. Just saying, the commands don't matter. My situation matters. It'll be fine. Our situation cannot determine what we do. What matters is God's commands. Whether you are single or married or rich or poor or love your job or hate your job or a brand new Christian or an old-time Christian or whatever you are, obey. God's commands are what part of how you live with contentment. Part of how you live with contentment is to say, okay, I actually know what I'm supposed to do in this situation. I actually have a guide through all of the mess and the fog and the haze. I actually have a compass that can guide me. Even though there's a million things I don't like, even though there's things I wouldn't choose, even though there's things I don't understand, I do know something. God's commands are what matter. Think about your situation. There might be a lot that's unclear in your family life, kids, marriage. You can be confused. What do? What does God say? Obey. There's a clarity with that. There's a clarity. That's part of how you can have contentment, is to just have clarity. Part of what is so discombobulating about our consumeristic culture is we're constantly, buy this, do this, and there's overwhelming amount of choices. Want to buy dressing for your salad? 10,000 options. It's like, I don't know what to do. I'll buy all of them. Just squeeze them all in. And it can be confusing with life to be like, man, there's so many. The part of why we're discontent is the amount of things. Thus, knowing that God's commands are what matters actually helps enable contentment by just giving us a clarity. This is what I'm supposed to do. Feel pressure in your life to maybe bigger things than you are now? Greatness, bigness. I think maybe all generations experience this, but my generation, as a elder statesman of the millennial generation, we're constantly told, dream big, dream big, dream big, dream big. Make a difference, change the world. I think some of the best advice you can have is to dream small. Which, by that, what I mean is just focus on the simplicity of obedience in front of you. It's liberating. I'm not saying you shouldn't have ambition. I'm not saying you shouldn't be entrepreneurial or do things, but sometimes the weight of change the world is too much. And the simplicity of remember God's commands, obey Him, is actually what we need. Because we can do that wherever we are. You might not be able to change the world in the job you have or the family you have or the skills and gifts and talents and educational experience and family background and things that have gone into who you are. You might just be a normal old person, but you can obey God's commands. And there's a simplicity to that that says, and thus, your life still is doing what it's meant for. Obey God's commands. Sometimes there's a lot of things that we don't have power in. Chronic illness, sometimes our situation maritally, whether we're single or married or kids struggling with infertility or miscarriage or relationship problems that you've tried everything that you can to solve and can't solve. And there's so much that we don't have any power in. No matter what ability we bring to the table, there's things that we can't change. Sometimes I read the headlines and young, 30-year-old man drops dead of heart attack. So there's things that are just out of our control that we have no power in. What do we do when we look at life and say, I can't change this? Maybe this will never change. What do I do? Obey God's commands. That gives a path, a simplicity. Sometimes we are so focused on the one day that we miss today. Sometimes we're so focused on, once I have this job, or once I get married, or once I make this amount of money, then I'll start being generous. Once I get married, then I'll really start making Jesus the center of my life because I want to have a family that's really focused on God together. Once I get this job, then I'll really be able to be a good coworker and be a light. And once I live in this place, then I'll, and we can think, once I get to this place, that's when I'll really be able to do the things that God has for me. And we miss the faithfulness that God's calling us into right now, the obedience that God's calling us into right now. It would be like a parent that just has a baby and is like, yeah, that's nice, but I can't wait to have grandkids. Then I'll really be a devoted grandpa. I'll really be the best grandma. You're nice and all, but I can't wait to be a grandparent. And it's easy to do that. It's easy to constantly think our faithfulness is in the future, whether that's with our time or our money or our relationships. Instead of, God calls us to focus on His commands now, to be faithful in the life situation you find yourself in now. So we often want escape, to manage our situation, to have a different situation. God wants obedience. You want to be content. Remember God's control and remember God's commands. Remember His commands. It actually gives a great freedom, and His commands are good. It gives a great clarity. It gives a great focus. And He's changing us in the middle of our situation, even if our situation doesn't change. And you miss that if you're not focused on obedience. Third thing is that we need to remember God's call or His salvation. A lot of times when the Bible uses the word calling, it doesn't mean what we often use by calling, which is kind of a vocational call. It is talking about the call of salvation, where God calls us to Himself. And so when Paul uses this word here, he's talking about God's call of salvation. There's times, I don't know if you feel this often, or maybe it comes at different times in your life. There's times that we want our life situation to change or feel discouraged or disappointed by our life situation because of our social status. So for them, the uncircumcision, circumcision, it may have been that some of them that were circumcised, they started in the Jewish community and then they became Christians. And maybe for some of them, they were like, it would be better for me if I was uncircumcised because I could kind of fit in with this Gentile group. And for some of them, they might have felt like, man, a lot of the people are Jews, and maybe that's more holy that they were circumcised. Maybe I need to get circumcised to fit in with them. Maybe that's holier. Could go either way. Or for some of them that were slaves, they might have felt, okay, my financial situation, my social situation, isn't as important, I feel lesser than, really want to be a freed person, then I could really do things for God. Then maybe I'd have better status and God could really use me, or maybe I would be more spiritually significant in some way. And maybe even for those that were not slaves, but that were freed, they might have felt some sense of, man, if I wasn't this wealthy person, but I experienced kind of more of this, I'd be nearer to God, or could identify more with suffering, and could identify more with what it means to be a slave of Christ. And we can sometimes look at our social status, whatever that is, whether it's financial or married, single, or family life, and feel that in order to experience contentment, or in order to be important, or in order to be used or useful for God, or if our life could be better for God, our status has to change. Paul says, no, that's not true. Your status, whatever it is not the ultimate thing about you. Your status, it doesn't mean it's totally insignificant, but your status is not the ultimate thing about you. When he says this, he who is called by the Lord as a slave is the Lord's freedman. He who is called as a free man is Christ's slave. Saying what's most important, what's ultimate about your identity is who you are connected to Christ. What's ultimate about who you are, the most ultimate thing that defines who you are, if you're a Christian, is who you are connected to Christ. So if you are free, you are a slave. If you are free, if you're lighting off fireworks all the time because you're celebrating your freedom, you're a slave to Christ. You're a slave to Christ. That's what's ultimate about you. And if you're enslaved, what's ultimate about you is you are free in Christ. You belong to Him. What's ultimate about you is who you are connected to Christ. And that's true if you're married, it's true if you're single, it's true if you're black, it's true if you're white, or if you're brown, or if you're somewhere in between, or whatever you are. It's what's ultimate about you is who you are connected to Christ. That's what's ultimate about you. It doesn't mean that those things are totally insignificant, but it relativizes them. It makes it so that it doesn't determine your contentment. That's what Paul's getting at. It doesn't determine your situation, doesn't determine even situations that have been such since birth, like circumcision. They don't determine even situations like slavery, which is life encompassing. It doesn't determine your contentment. Who you are connected to Christ has the most power. And if you remember your call, your salvation, if you remember who He is and what He's done for you, that has the power to give you contentment, no matter what your situation is. Whether it's something that's been so a part of your life since birth, or it's something that it seems all-encompassing, He's saying, remember God's call. Remember God called you. God saved you. That's what's most important about your life. The salvation that you've been given in Him. That doesn't mean that you should never try to change your situation, or it can never change. That's what Paul says. He says, if you can get your freedom and you're a slave, great, do it by all means. But he's saying it shouldn't rule you. It shouldn't master you. And we shouldn't be slaves of people. Shouldn't let other people's opinions and other people's status projections that they put upon us, we shouldn't let that control us. We shouldn't let that be what determines our contentment. We should let what determines our contentment be, I'm His. He called me. I was bought by Him. I belong to Him. I've been saved by Him. I'm wanted by Him. I'm valued by Him. I'm not a slave of other people. I'm defined by Him. See, I don't know if that's a part of what plays into some discontentment for you. That as you are struggling with contentment and happiness and wanting certain situations in your life to change, what if you remembered your call? God doesn't look at you and say, once you have a little bit more income, then I'll really think you're something. Or once you have this job, then I'll really finally be proud of you. Or once you change this thing, or that's not what God does. He says, remember, you belong to him, saved by him, called by him. God might not change your situation. He might. And it's not wrong to say, God, would you change this? I don't want to be sick. God, would you change this? I want to be married. God, would you change this? I want things to go better. I want a different job. It's not bad to ask God for things. God might not change your situation, but he's already changed the ultimate situation of yours by giving you salvation. We all want to experience contentment, the joy, the peace, resilience that comes from not being controlled by our circumstances. Wouldn't you want that? Wouldn't you want to be able to live through this week or live through your life and say, yeah, there's things I want to be different, but they don't control me. There's situations I don't like, but they don't determine my joy. I mean, you look at the apostles at various times singing while in prison. That's not the first thought that comes to my mind of life sentence. Oh, that's great. I'll be able to sing through all the hymns in this hymnal. That's not the first thing that comes to my mind. But you look at people in the Bible and even in church history and biographies that you can read of great Christians that have come before us that experience great suffering in their life and are able to say, yeah, but you know what? And it's okay. I rejoice. My situation doesn't control me. How can we do that? How can we do that? With whatever it is that you're facing, how can you do that? Almost nothing is more practical than this. Our answer so often is, you know how I can do that? You know how I could get contentment, get happiness? I need to fill in the hole with something. Once I have this, then I could have it. Paul says, no. You can face anything, whatever your background, whatever your wealth, whatever your social status, whatever your social marriage status, you can enter each season, each situation, not focused on the future, not focused on getting out, by remembering God's control, God's commands, and God's call on your life. And I love the way he ends it. He says, brothers and sisters, each person is to remain with God in the situation in which he was called. That's really what everything is summed up as. Remain with God in the situation in which you are called. Your situation is secondary. God's presence is primary. Remain with God in the situation. Isn't that amazing? That whatever your situation is, whatever it is right now that is hard for you or you don't like or you want to change, God is with you. God is with you. Whatever the situation is. Say, I don't want this. I want this to be different. God is with you right there. Say, I want to get to this place. Well, God's already with you right here. And he'll be with you there. But God is with you. So whatever situation that you find yourself in, it's not that you need a different situation. It's that you need to understand and remember and remain with God. Because he is with you there now. He was there when you were young. He'll be there when you're old. He was there when you were born. He'll be there when you die. He's there in sickness and health. He's there wealth and poverty. He's there if you live in Denver, you live somewhere else, Timbuktu, Nebraska, even. God is with you. Remain where you are with God. Now listen, we understand something like this in different ways. So if I were to say, we'll go back to Nebraska, just since I said that, there's places that you want to live and places you don't want to live, right? And I'm not saying that about Nebraska. I'm just saying there's places you want to live and places you don't want to live. And we all have different ones. Some of us are like, man, I wish I could have a condo in the middle of the city. Some of us, like, I wish I could live on 20 acres and just have a big farm. Or some of us, I just want the cul-de-sac, suburban dream, whatever, right? It's different situations that we go, I want that situation. If I had that situation, if I could design my perfect living situation, forget about job, forget about this. If I could have that, that would be awesome. And if I were able to give you, and I can't do this for everybody, just one person, the winner of the salsa contest, if I could give you $50 million, if I could give you $50 million as an annual salary, you could live wherever you wanted. You could live in the middle, you could live in LA and say, you know what, I still really want the farm life. I bet there's some plot of land that you could still get a nice farm. You go, I don't really want to live in LA, but I have $50 million. I can design my living situation however I want. Or if you lived in Nebraska and you're like, I don't really want to live in a cornfield. I don't like corn. I don't like cows. I don't like blah and casseroles, so I don't want to live there. But if I had $50 million, I could be the king of Nebraska. And I could design the best house you've ever seen, and I could fly out all my friends whenever I wanted. We could say, I know that with $50 million, I could live in any situation. We'll take money out of it. Maybe it's people. Maybe you say, you know what, I don't care where I live. If I could live right next door to my best friend, I don't care if it was LA, I don't care if it was Nebraska, I don't care if it was the Sahara Desert. If I could live right next door to my best friend or a certain family member, if I could live right there or maybe a whole block, if I could do that, I don't care where I live, because if I was in that situation, the situation would transform because of this thing, whether it's family or friends or $50 million or whatever it is. Sometimes people will say, man, as long as I'm healthy, this doesn't matter. If I had this thing, the situation doesn't matter. So we understand that if I kind of use some extremes, right? Paul is saying, it doesn't matter about your situation. You are with God. It doesn't matter about your situation. You are with God. You're with Him. That's better than $50 million. That's better than your best friend next door. That's better than LA. It's better than being the king of Nebraska. You are with God. He's with you in your situation. He is with you. And He tells us, remain with God. Which is interesting because God is there, but we have this action to remain with Him. It could kind of be like, sometimes we say we want to make sure that we're present. You know, we're around people, but you're on your phone. Well, I'm there, okay, but you're not present. Sometimes we do that same thing. Yeah, God's there, but are you remaining with Him? God's there, He's in the room, He's in the situation, but are you remaining with Him? He gives us the action. He's not saying, ask God to be with you. God is with you. But He's saying, remain with Him. Which is why we've looked at the ways that we do that. We remain with Him by remembering His control. Part of how you remain with God in your situation is by focusing on Him, saying, God, I know you're in control. I know you've assigned this. I know you're wise. I know you love me. I know you have a purpose. Part of how we remain with Him is by remembering His commands, saying, God, I don't understand all this, but I'm going to obey you. God, I don't know what to do, but I can open your word and obey the things that you tell me to do. That's my compass. Part of how we remain with Him is by remembering His salvation. God, I don't like the situation I'm in or even my status or how I feel about this, but help me not to be a slave to what other people say and do. Help me to remember your call, your salvation, who you say I am. Help me to remember that. That's how we remain with Him, whatever the situation is. We're going to take communion in just a moment. We take communion every week here at True Life. If you're a Christian, there's communion cups that you can grab in the back if you didn't grab one on the way in. And when we take communion, we are remembering Him. We're remembering Him. We're remembering the one that assigned us and calls us and is in control and commands us. Isn't just some distant God, but He's the God that came to this earth, Jesus Christ. The reason that we can be joyful in remembering Him and remaining with Him is because we say, look, this is the one that gave up everything for me. He went to the cross and For all the times that I've been discontent, forgives me of those sins. His blood was shed on the cross, we remember. His body broken to forgive me of all my discontent, of all my coveting, of all my envy, of all my ungratefulness, of all my grumbling, of all my excuses and disobedience. He forgives me of all of that. And look who He is. Look what He would do for me. That's why I can trust His control. That's why I can trust His wisdom. That's why I can obey His commands. That's why I can rest in His salvation, because look what He would do for me. He would come to this earth and surrender all for me. He would leave His perfect situation to enter the most tumultuous situation to save me. That's why I can trust Him. That's why I can be content. And so when we take communion, we remember those things. If you remember these things, this gives you a deep strength. It gives you a strength to face whatever it is that you're in the middle of right now or whatever's coming. It enables you to have a deep contentment and a deep joy. So as you take communion, confess where you've been discontent or grumbling or disobedient. Thank God for His grace and His salvation. And thank Him for His control. And thank Him for His commands and His goodness. And ask for His help to, in the particulars of your life, to experience deeper contentment. Let's pray together. Father, I thank You for loving us and giving us Your Son and showing that You care for each of us, that each of our lives You see. You know each of our situations, and they're not accidental. Thank You, God, that in Your great love and Your great power and Your great wisdom, we belong to You and You are with us. Help us believe. Help us rejoice even in the middle of our situations. Help us to trust You. Let us be a people of great contentment. Pray these things in Your name, Jesus.